Prospect Creek, Alaska, 70 below, the kind of cold that erases breath and memory. The night pressed against the earth like a giant hand trying to still every living thing. Then, beneath the howl of the storm, a new sound cut through the frozen dark. The fragile tap of claws on a window pane sealed in ice. Inside the lone cabin, former U.S. Army soldier Ethan Moore froze mid-step. PTSD flickered in his chest like old lightning. And there, on the other side of the frost-bitten glass, stood a German shepherd mother, her fur crusted with ice, 3 trembling pups curled beneath her ribcage like fading embers, begging not to die out. The survival rule whispered, never open the door in a 70-degree storm. He opened it anyway. What followed was a silent pact by the fire, a wounded pup pulled from a steel trap in the killing cold, and the chilling sight of a stranger's silhouette.
It's okay, come on.
From behind the pines.
Quickly now, get inside where it's warm.
This is the night a hardened soldier found grace in paw prints. The night warmth defied a storm, and a broken cabin became a sanctuary. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no soul, human or animal, should face the cold alone, hit subscribe. And if you still believe God writes miracles in the snow, type Amen. The night in Prospect Creek pressed against the world with a murderous stillness, the kind of cold that could fracture bone and steal breath in the space of a single exhale, sealing the wilderness beneath a sheet of frozen silence. Inside a small timber cabin half buried under drifts of wind-packed snow, Ethan Moore stood over a cast-iron skillet where diced onions hissed quietly. The soft glow of the kerosene lamp flickered across his angled features, high cheekbones, a firm jaw shadowed by several days of unshaven stubble, and deep-set steel-gray eyes that reflected both fatigue and the kind of steadfastness carved only through war and loss. At 45, his body was still strong, broad-shouldered, thick forearms, posture naturally straightened by years of military discipline. But there was a heaviness in the way he moved, as if every step carried echoes of memories he tried not to relive. PTSD lived in him like an unwelcome tenant, not always visible, but always listening, always waiting for the moment to grab hold of his breath and twist his thoughts into knots. This night, brutal, subarctic, and brutally silent, was the kind of night that tested his edges. He stirred the onions, letting their warmth rise like an anchor. Cooking was one of the few things that grounded him. Not because he particularly enjoyed it, but because chopping, heating, stirring, these were motions so far removed from combat that his mind could sometimes unclench long enough to breathe. The cabin around him was compact and built with purpose. A wood stove crackled in one corner, shedding a halo of orange heat over the worn leather couch and the hunting rifle mounted above the door. A shelf above the stove displayed a single framed photograph, a younger Ethan in uniform, standing beside 2 men whose faces were partially hidden by desert goggles. Only one of those men, Sergeant Kyle Bennett, had survived that mission. The other, Corporal James Reddick, had been swallowed by an explosion that still rang in Ethan's skull whenever the wind shook the windows just right. Tonight, the wind had been kind enough to stay distant, until it wasn't. A soft sound, so delicate he almost dismissed it as a quirk of the timber walls, tapped against the frost-plated window. Ethan froze. His hand tightened around the wooden spoon. His breath thinned. That tap sounded, too, intentional. Tap, tap, tap. 3 small contacts spaced with the irregular rhythm of desperation. His pulse quickened in a way he despised, tight, coiled like a spring. His military instincts flared awake, cataloging every detail: stove heat, lamp glow, window placement, potential lines of entry. He set the spoon down quietly and moved toward the window, boots whispering over the old pine boards. As he approached, thin sheets of frost feathered across the glass, shimmering like etched silver. The tapping came again, this time accompanied by a faint, muffled whine, a sound so fragile it pried. Something deep inside him open. Ethan gripped the curtain edge. His breath fogged as he exhaled, and for a moment he hesitated. Out here, people didn't knock on windows in the middle of the night, and whatever did knock, did it need help or bring danger? He drew the curtain back. His heart gave a jolt. Pressing weakly against the window was a German shepherd, an adult female, ribs faintly visible beneath her dense winter coat. But the coat, though thick, was clumped with frost and ice. Patches of snow stuck so deeply that even her natural insulation had given up the fight. Her fur was sable, a blend of black and tan, with a dark saddle pattern down her spine. Her ears drooped under exhaustion, and her amber eyes, though dulled by cold, carried a pleading depth that pierced through the frost and straight into him. And under her body, huddled, trembling violently, were 3 pups, tiny, barely weaned. Their fur was a mix of sable and cream, all dusted with shards of ice. They whimpered softly, their noses pressed into their mother's belly, seeking warmth she no longer had to give. It was a scene he instantly recognized, the posture not of a stray searching for scraps, but of a mother who had used the last of her strength to reach a final refuge. "Jesus," Ethan murmured, voice cracking in a way he hadn't felt since the day he carried Reddick's dog tags home in a plastic bag. The mother dog swayed where she stood, her breath fogging in trembling intervals. She didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't demand entry. She simply looked at him through the frost, eyes wide with a mixture of hope and surrender, as if she had knocked on every other door in the world and found only silence until now. Ethan reached for the window latch on instinct, then stopped. The cold beyond that pain was deadly. Opening the window could drop the cabin's temperature dangerously, but leaving them outside in 70 degrees? It would be a death sentence in minutes. He grabbed his parka from the hook by the door, a thick olive-colored coat with reinforced seams, and shoved his arms through the sleeves. The moment he opened the door, the cold slapped him hard enough to sting his teeth. He stepped out, boots sinking into the powder, breath crystallizing instantly. The mother dog flinched back, but did not retreat. Her protective instinct anchored her in place. "Hey," he said softly, lowering himself to one knee. "Easy. I'm not going to hurt you." His voice carried a warmth he didn't know he still possessed. Slowly, painfully slowly, the dog shifted her weight, angling her body so the pups remained sheltered from the wind. Ethan extended a gloved hand. She sniffed it, hesitation trembling through her frame, then, miraculously, pressed her nose against his palm. "Good girl," he whispered. He lifted the first pup, a tiny male, with eyes barely open and a patch of white on his chest. The pup shuddered from cold, so light he felt weightless. Ethan tucked him into the inner fold of his coat. The second pup, a female with softer tan fur, whimpered weakly as he scooped her up. The third, the smallest, didn't make a sound at all. He swallowed hard. Finally, he tried to help the mother stand. When she took a step forward, she stumbled. Ethan caught her with his other arm, guiding her gently toward the open door. Inside the cabin, warmth burst around them like a lifeline. Ethan closed the door quickly, sealing out the biting wind. The mother dog collapsed on the rug near the stove, sides heaving with exhaustion. Ethan placed the pups beside her, and they immediately burrowed into her damp fur. Only then did he see it clearly. Around her neck, beneath the thick fur and ice crystals, was a raw wound, a deep, angry groove where something had tightened and cut into her skin. A rope? A cable? Whatever it was, someone had meant to restrain her harshly, or worse. Ethan's gut twisted. He had seen wounds like this on military dogs abused by insurgents. He had seen it on stray hounds rescued from illegal breeding compounds in remote villages. This wasn't nature's doing. Someone had done this to her. He knelt beside the dog, reaching carefully toward the injury. She didn't growl, didn't even flinch. She simply watched him with those amber eyes, eyes carrying the kind of gratitude that hurt to look at. "You've been through hell," he murmured, voice low and strained, "and someone brought that hell right up to my doorstep." The thought chilled him far more than the cold outside. He examined the wound more closely, and as he brushed aside a clump of frozen fur, he noticed something else. A faint metallic smell mixed with the rawness of the skin. Whatever had been around her neck had been there long enough to break flesh, long enough to suggest she hadn't escaped recently. She had been running for days, which meant whoever had hurt her might not be far behind. The dog shifted weakly, nosing her pups closer. Ethan felt a swell of something deep inside, anger, protectiveness, something almost paternal, awakening from a place he thought long dead. For years he'd avoided responsibility beyond his own survival. But the sight before him, this battered mother who had used every last ember of strength to save her children, ignited something fierce and unyielding. A threat was near. Danger had touched his land, and 3 helpless lives were now depending on him. Ethan exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "I've got you," he whispered to the mother dog. "All of you. You're safe now. Whoever did this, they're not getting you back." Yet even as he spoke, a faint unease prickled the back of his neck. A soldier's instinct. A warning felt more than heard. Somewhere beyond the frost-covered window, in the suffocating dark of the Alaskan night, he sensed that something, or someone, was still out there. Watching. Waiting. The danger wasn't over. It had only just begun. Dawn crept over Prospect Creek like the dim glow of a dying lantern, its light unable to soften the murderous cold outside. Even inside the cabin, the air held a knife's-edge sharpness each time the stove's flames dipped. Ethan Moore stood over the wood stove, feeding it a split log, trying to quiet the tremor in his hands. He blamed the cold at first. Then he heard it, the soft, weak whimper of one of the pups, and realized the shaking came from deeper, older wounds. His PTSD always struck hardest when something needed him. Responsibility had a way of dragging memories back to the surface. The cabin smelled of melting snow, animal fur, and faint smoke. The mother German shepherd lay curled around her 3 pups, her body still trembling occasionally but showing more life than the night before. She lifted her head now and then, ears twitching toward the door, toward the windows, toward every sound the world made. Her amber eyes were sharp with vigilance, and the tension in her muscles told Ethan that whatever she'd escaped, she wasn't convinced it was gone. "Hope," Ethan murmured as he knelt beside her, testing the name he had offered her in the quiet moments before sleep. She blinked slowly in acknowledgement, though her attention flicked back toward the frosted window, as if expecting shadows to move behind it. The pups shifted against her belly, their small bodies warmed by the stove's gentle heat and the soft blanket Ethan had laid beneath them. The smallest, the one that had scared him the most last night by how cold it felt, let out a tiny squeak and nuzzled closer to Hope's chest. Ethan felt a knot loosen inside him. At least they were alive. At least the brutal night hadn't taken them. He reached for a clean bowl, filling it with warm water and setting it near Hope's muzzle. "Drink," he said quietly. "You need your strength." Hope sniffed, hesitated, then lowered her head and lapped weakly at the water. Her tongue trembled from exhaustion. Ethan noticed how raw the skin around her neck looked in the light, dried blood, irritated flesh, the imprint of something tight and cruel. Not rope. Something thinner. Wire, maybe. The kind used by trappers. The thought made Ethan's jaw clench. He stood, rubbing the back of his neck as he walked toward the window. Outside, the morning was a bleak white canvas that swallowed the contours of the land. Nothing moved, not the trees, not the sky. Only the wind cut across the plain, whispering like distant gunfire. Ethan had come here to leave the battlefield behind, but sometimes Alaska felt just as hostile. A deep, low rumble sounded behind him. Hope stiffened, her hackles rising slightly. Not a growl of aggression, more a warning. Her eyes were locked on the door. Ethan felt it then, too. A shift in the air, the subtle instinct his training had sharpened. He grabbed his heavy coat from the wall hook. "I'm just checking," he told Hope, keeping his voice calm. "Stay with them." He stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking under the weight of ice. His breath solidified into crystals before drifting away in thin streams. The horizon was empty. No footprints nearby except his own from last night. But something felt wrong. He crouched, scanning the snow with a soldier's practiced eye. That was when he saw it. Near the bottom step, tucked partially beneath a thin layer of snow, was a steel snare trap. A new one, unrusted, unweathered, set with intention. The open jaws glinted faintly in the weak light, the chain curling beneath it like a waiting serpent. Ethan's stomach tightened. This wasn't an old, abandoned trap. Someone had placed it here recently, possibly hours ago, and whoever did it either knew animals were nearby or had followed Hope's trail right to his home. He rose slowly, eyes sweeping across the tree line. Nothing moved, yet the stillness itself felt predatory. He remembered the mother's wound, the wire embedded into her flesh. A trapper. But no ordinary one. This was someone persistent, someone ruthless, the kind of person who wouldn't stop at injuring an animal. His pulse thudded in his ears. He wasn't easily afraid. War had carved too much out of him, but he was cautious. And now, he wasn't alone. 3 small pups slept inside. A wounded mother depended on him. A new responsibility, whether he had asked for it or not. He bent to examine the trap more closely. The metal was polished, the spring mechanism sharp and efficient. Not the kind an amateur used. He brushed away snow and noticed faint scratches on the steel, like something struggled in it recently. "Hope," he whispered under his breath. Someone had trapped her. Someone had tried to kill her, and she had escaped. He straightened again and scanned the nearby snow, searching for footprints. But the wind had wiped everything clean. Whoever had come near his cabin had been swallowed by the storm's erasing hand. The door creaked behind him as Hope pressed her muzzle against the opening, her breath forming a mist that curled toward him. She stepped onto the porch, but only as far as the threshold, keeping her body angled protectively toward the pups inside. Her eyes found the trap immediately, and she froze, ears flattening, muscles tensed with instinctive fear. "You remember this, don't you?" Ethan murmured. He crouched, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. Her fur was thick but coarse under his palm, trembling with the memory of pain. Someone came too close. He lifted the trap carefully and carried it inside, placing it on the table. He needed to inspect it more, maybe recognize the make. A tool like this told a story, and Ethan had grown skilled at reading the stories left behind by dangerous men. Hope paced near her pups, unable to settle. Ethan noticed how she kept glancing between the windows and the door, tail low, body braced. She wasn't just tired. She wasn't just hurt. She was anticipating someone's return. The pups whimpered again, and one tried to climb onto her foreleg. Ethan felt that twist of helpless tenderness again, the sensation of being needed. It frightened him because needing meant losing, and he had lost enough for 10 lifetimes. He walked to the table, studying the trap's metal frame. It wasn't homemade. It had a manufacturer's imprint. Northern Line, a company known for high-tension snares used by professional trappers. Not illegal, but the way this one was set, so close to his home, was no accident. He rubbed his thumb along the steel, feeling the cold bite into his skin. Someone had found Hope. Someone had hunted her. Someone might return. He swallowed, forcing calm into his breathing. He needed to think clearly. Panic had no place in survival. Not now. "Hope," he said softly, turning toward her. "Whoever hurt you, they might come looking, but they're not getting you back." Hope met his gaze, her amber eyes steady despite the tremor in her body. Ethan felt something pass between them, a pact, silent but certain. He walked to the door and locked it, checking the windows, adjusting the stove, ensuring everything inside remained warm. The cabin was small, but it was defensible. He could protect it if needed. He had done more with less in worse places. But another thought crept into his mind like a shadow. Whoever set that trap, they were bold enough to come right up to his home. And boldness like that usually came with confidence. Confidence that no one would stop them. As Ethan sat on the couch, running a weary hand over his stubble, Hope settled near the stovepipe surface, Pups clinging to her warmth. But her ears never stopped moving. Neither did Ethan's thoughts, because the trap was not just a warning, it was a message. Morning in Prospect Creek was an illusion rather than a change of light. The world remained dim, smothered by a ceiling of gray clouds thick as wool. Only a faint shift in the shadows announced that the sun had technically risen. Inside the cabin, the stove crackled as Ethan Moore added 2 more logs, the warmth creeping slowly outward to fight the murderous cold that tried to claw through the walls. Hope lay curled beside her pups, her breathing steadier now, though her ears still twitched at every unpredictable gust of wind. Ethan had barely slept. The presence of the steel snare trap outside his cabin lingered in his mind like a half-spoken threat. He rubbed a hand across his eyes, trying to shake off the residue of restless dreams. Visions of distant deserts, fallen comrades, and explosions that never stopped echoing. But something else jolted him into alertness. Hope suddenly lifted her head, her nose pointed toward the window, her body stiff as a bowstring. Then Ethan heard it too, a faint crunch of snow, far off but distinct. Someone was out there. He moved to the window cautiously, shifting the curtain just enough to see the tree line beyond his porch. At first, nothing moved. The pines stood silent and heavy with snow. Then a dark shape slid between them, a human figure, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in heavy winter gear. The man moved with precision, stepping lightly despite the deep snow, as if he knew exactly how to stay quiet. He didn't look like a lost traveler. He looked like someone who belonged in the cold, and someone who didn't want to be seen. The figure paused behind a thick pine trunk. Ethan's instincts sharpened. Whoever this was had been watching his cabin long enough to know where to stand out of sight. He felt Hope press her muzzle against the back of his leg, trembling not from fear, but recognition. This was the presence she had sensed all night. Ethan turned from the window, forcing himself to breathe steadily. "All right," he murmured to himself. "We do this smart." He crossed to the table, picked up the snare trap he had brought in the night before, and examined it again. The grooves in the metal told him it had been triggered recently. He had seen Hope's wounds, but this trap's spring still felt almost new. Whoever set it had more than one. He set the trap down and crouched beside Hope. She pressed her nose against his hand, her eyes filled with fear and fierce protectiveness as she curled tighter around her pups. "Whoever hurt you, they're close," Ethan whispered. The knowledge settled heavily in his chest. He had survived ambushes in Afghanistan. He had been hunted before. But this time the stakes were different. There were small lives inside his home now, lives that couldn't run or fight. Ethan moved to the shelf where his old emergency radio sat. It was a bulky, military-grade unit with chipped green casing, the kind he'd kept mostly out of habit rather than actual expectation of needing it. He switched it on and adjusted the dial. A wash of static answered him, loud and chaotic. He tried again, moving the antenna toward the window. Nothing. Then a brief flash of clarity broke through the noise. "Storm warning, visibility 0. Ranger units grounded," followed by another burst of sharp static. His jaw tightened. The windstorm roaring across Prospect Creek's valley had scrambled all communication. Help wasn't coming. Not yet. He tried rotating the antenna again. "Ranger Station North, this is Moore. I have trespass activity near the cabin. Possible animal cruelty case. Repeat, possible illegal breeding operation." More static. Not a reply. He set the radio down with a muted curse. Ethan wasn't a man prone to fear, but he knew danger when he saw it, and he saw it moving silently between the trees. Determined to gather more information, he examined Hope's neck again, gently parting the thick fur. The wound was raw, wide, and linear, the kind caused by a tightening wire loop pulled repeatedly as the animal struggled. But there was something else. Faint, almost invisible horizontal abrasions, as if the wire had been attached to a post or fixed point designed to restrict movement. He had seen injuries like this overseas, used in illegal dogfighting camps and black market breeding rings where animals were restrained harshly to force litters. "This wasn't a wildlife trap," Ethan muttered. "This was someone's equipment." Hope whined softly, and Ethan stared at her with a rising anger he hadn't felt in years. He stood and grabbed his binoculars from a hook near the window. Through the glass, he scanned the tree line again. The dark figure was gone. Only the faint sway of a low branch betrayed recent movement. Ethan didn't like mysteries, and he liked threats even less. His heartbeat steadied into something colder, quieter, the calm that had settled over him during combat whenever danger crept close. But this calm didn't comfort him. It warned him. Hope suddenly barked, sharp and quick. Not aggressive, alert. Ethan looked at the doorway. Snow had fallen from the roof edge, but beneath it, etched partially into the drifts, he saw something new, a fresh boot print. Not his, not from the night before. Someone had walked near the cabin again while he slept, and the print was angled toward the window as if the person had been watching inside. Ethan grabbed his coat and stepped onto the porch. The cold slammed into him instantly, slicing across his face. He crouched near the print. The sole pattern was distinct, sturdy commercial winter boots with deep treads worn slightly at the heel. A hunter's boot, a trapper's boot, or a smuggler's. The size suggested a large man, maybe 6 feet or more. Ethan straightened slowly. The man hadn't tried to hide his tracks. That meant confidence, or a warning. He scanned the forest again, but saw only snow and shadows. Hope watched from inside, her ears pinned flat. The pup squirmed beneath her, sensing the tension. Ethan re-entered the cabin and bolted the door, forcing the wooden beam into place. He needed a plan. But before he could speak, before he could even think clearly, the wind shifted again, and on that gust came a faint, distant sound. Not footsteps, not branches. A whistle. 3 short notes. A signal. A call meant for a dog. Hope shuddered violently and growled, a deep sound Ethan had not yet heard from her. Panic flashed through her eyes. She recognized the whistle, and she feared it. Ethan clenched his fists. Someone wasn't just searching the woods randomly. Someone was calling their dog. Hope. They wanted her back. And they weren't coming peacefully. Inside the dim warmth of the cabin, surrounded by the trembling breaths of the pups and the icy whispers outside, Ethan finally understood. He was no longer protecting animals from the wilderness. He was protecting them from a man. Afternoon in Prospect Creek did not bring warmth. It merely shifted the shadows from one direction to another. The sky had settled into a heavy iron-gray dome, pressing down over the valley as if preparing to bury everything beneath it. Inside the cabin, Ethan Moore had just finished wrapping Hope's wound with clean gauze when the German shepherd suddenly snapped upright, ears rigid, pupils widening with a frantic wildness he had not yet seen in her. A single heartbeat later, she let out a sharp, guttural howl, a sound not of warning, but of terror. Ethan's blood chilled even before he understood why. He turned toward the corner of the cabin where the pups lay nestled together on a folded blanket. Only two looked back at him with round, trembling eyes. The smallest, the pale-coated runt with a tiny black stripe along its muzzle, was gone. Hope barked again, desperate, scraping at the door with her paws. Ethan shoved his boots on, grabbed his parka, and stepped outside. The cold attacked him instantly, biting through fabric and crawling into his bones like a living thing. At 70 degrees, even the air seemed to resist being breathed. But there, beneath the faint glow bleeding out from the cabin window, he saw the truth. Tracks. Small drag marks in the snow leading away from the porch, the clear signs of something tiny and helpless being pulled or carried, something that couldn't resist. Not an animal. An animal would have left prints of its own. This was a glove-pulled motion, crisp and controlled. A human hand. Ethan knelt stiffly, following the depressions. Hope pushed past him, nose to the snow, whimpering, her entire body trembling with panic. "Easy, girl," Ethan whispered, though there was nothing easy about what lay ahead. They began following the trail into the forest, the snow crunching beneath Ethan's boots with a brittle, death-like crackle. The wind sliced across his face like razors, forcing his eyes into thin slits. Frost began forming on the edges of his eyelashes. The temperature was falling further. He felt it in his joints, in the stiffness forming around his knuckles. Hope surged ahead, driven by a primal force stronger than the cold. Ethan kept pace, though the cold quickly seeped into his gloves and turned his fingers numb. As they moved deeper among the towering pines, the shadows thickened. Ethan caught glimpses of movement, branches shifting, snow falling from high limbs. But there was no figure, no sound other than the wind and Hope's desperate whine. Visibility shrank to barely 20 feet. It felt like walking inside a tunnel carved from ice. After what felt like an hour but was likely only minutes, they found it. A sharp metallic glint in the snow, a dark stain spreading around it, and a small, unmoving body. The missing pup lay half buried in snow beside a large steel trap, one built for wolves or wolverines, not for tiny newborn German shepherds. Its little foreleg was caught between the jaws, and, though the pup still breathed weakly, the blood around the wound had already begun to freeze into dark crystalline clumps. Hope rushed forward, pressing her nose against her baby, whining with heartbreaking softness. Ethan felt something inside him crack. He had seen wounded children overseas, had carried broken bodies through smoke and sand, but something about this little creature, so small, so helpless, so clearly targeted, hit him harder than any memory he'd carried. He dropped to his knees and examined the trap. Heavy-duty construction, clean metal, recently placed. And beside it, a boot print, wide, deep, fresh. The same man from the tree line, the same boots from the cabin's window, the same pattern as the trap he found the night before. This wasn't a coincidence. This was deliberate. Ethan swallowed hard. His hands were numb, but he didn't hesitate. He gripped the steel jaws with both palms and forced them apart. The metal burned him instantly, cold burning as viciously as fire. A searing pain shot up his fingers and into his forearms, but he didn't release the pressure. Hope's soft cries spurred him on. With a groan of strain, the jaws sprang open. Ethan scooped the pup into his hands, cradling it against his chest to warm it. "Hang on, little guy," he murmured, breath trembling. "Stay with me." Hope pressed her head against his arm, protectiveness and desperation radiating from her trembling frame. He tore a strip of cloth from his sleeve and wrapped the pup's leg to slow the bleeding. His fingers stung violently. The skin was beginning to crack from frostbite, purple at the tips. He forced himself to focus. He scanned the area. More tracks, boot prints leading away from the trap, deeper into the woods. Whoever had done this had lingered long enough to set the trap, long enough to watch the pup fall into it, long enough to ensure the mother couldn't reach her child in time. There was a cruelty in the placement, a deliberate targeting. Ethan's jaw tightened. This was no random trapper. This was someone who knew the dogs, someone who wanted them back or wanted them gone. The wind roared again, nearly knocking him sideways. The storm was worsening, visibility shrinking. Ethan tucked the pup inside his parka, zipped it close, and motioned for Hope to follow. She stayed pressed to his leg as they began retracing their steps, but the path had already begun to blur under the shifting snow. Hope kept him going. Her sense of direction was sharper than his failing vision. Several times, she nudged him away from invisible dangers, unstable drifts, sharp ice patches, hollows hidden beneath the snow. Ethan's lungs burned with every breath. The cold air felt like shards of glass slicing the inside of his chest. By the time the cabin finally came into view, a faint golden square of light through the white haze, Ethan felt the weight of exhaustion pressing him down. But Hope barked once, sharply, urging him. Forward! He stumbled through the final stretch, bursting onto the porch with trembling legs. Inside, safe within the fragile warmth of the cabin, Ethan laid the injured pup beside the others. Hope immediately curled around them all, licking the wounded pup gently, nuzzling it as if trying to breathe life back into it. Ethan watched, heart pounding, breath shaky. His hands shook violently now, more from rage than from cold. He pulled off his gloves, saw the patchy discoloration from frostbite beginning to form. The pain would come later. For now, only one thought occupied his mind. Someone had taken a pup, dragged it into the woods, and used it as bait. This wasn't the work of a hunter. This was the work of a man who treated animals as tools, a man who wanted Hope back and would destroy anything in his way. And now Ethan had proof. Boot prints, trap patterns, the deliberate targeting of the smallest pup. He looked toward the forest, his eyes hardening. "This ends soon," he muttered, "one way or another." The storm wailed outside as if answering him. Night clamped down over Prospect Creek like a steel trap, swallowing even the dim gray that passed for daylight in the Alaskan winter. The storm outside had strengthened, dragging sheets of fine, glittering ice across the valley. Ethan Moore stepped back into his cabin with the rescued pup inside his coat, the faint warmth of the tiny body pressing against his chest. His hands ached sharply as blood returned to his frost-burned fingers, but he ignored the pain. Hope followed close behind, her posture tense, her ears pinned backward in fear and rage. Inside, the other two pups looked up as Ethan lowered their injured sibling onto the blanket. Hope lay beside them immediately, curling her body protectively around all three. Ethan examined the pup's leg again. The bleeding had slowed, but swelling was already forming around the bone. The pup whimpered softly. Hope licked its face and pressed her nose to its side as though urging it to stay awake. Ethan sat back on his heels. His muscles trembled, not from cold alone, but from something darker simmering beneath the surface. Anger, sharp and suffocating. He'd seen men do monstrous things in war, but cruelty toward helpless animals, toward a mother and her newborns, it stirred something more primal inside him. "This ends tonight," he murmured under his breath. Whether the words were a vow or a warning didn't matter. He rose and assessed the cabin. If the man had taken one pup, he would try again. The cabin had only two entrances, the front door and the back storage door that opened near the woodpile. Ethan dragged a heavy oak dresser from the wall and positioned it in front of the back door. He reinforced the front with a steel bar he once used for winter storms, ramming it into the slot above the frame. The window latches he checked twice, then added a simple noise alarm. Tin cups tied with fishing line, strung across the sill. The slightest movement would rattle them. He went outside briefly, to the extent he dared, and attached two small bells to the porch railing. They chimed faintly in the wind, a warning system raw and primitive but effective. Inside, he checked his equipment. His old Army flashlight still worked. His flare gun had 2 rounds left, and though he hadn't fired a weapon since leaving service, he kept one locked in a chest, a worn .308 hunting rifle with scratches along the wood stock. Ethan set it beside the door, but hesitated. He did not want to kill anyone, but he might need to stop someone. The wind roared outside, pushing against the walls. The cabin felt smaller than usual, a fortress and a cage at the same time. Ethan lit both lanterns to keep the darkness from suffocating him, the warm glow throwing long shadows across the room. Hope lifted her head at every sound. Twice she growled low, so quietly Ethan barely heard it. Hours crawled. The storm intensified. Ethan felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the pressure he'd known during long night watches. Overseas. He closed his eyes and forced his breath to steady. Not shallow, not quick. PTSD curled like smoke at the edges of his mind, threatening to drag him backward into memories he had spent years burying. A bombed-out street. A crying child he hadn't reached in time. A battlefield covered in dust that looked so much like snow. He pressed his palms against the wooden table until the tremors stopped. "Not now," he whispered. "Not tonight." Near midnight, Hope suddenly stood. Her body stiffened, her hackles rose. A guttural growl vibrated in her chest. The bells on the porch gave a single, unmistakable jingle. Ethan grabbed the flashlight and clicked it off. Darkness swallowed the cabin again, except for the faint glow of embers in the stove. He moved to the window, keeping low. A shadow moved across the porch, slow, careful, testing the door. Then a sudden impact rattled the hinges. Hope barked fiercely, the sound deep and explosive. The pups whimpered, burying themselves deeper beneath her. A second impact, stronger this time, shook the frame. Whoever stood outside wasn't trying to be discreet anymore. Ethan snapped on the floodlight switch near the wall. Outside, the old Army-grade spotlight he had mounted years ago burst to life, flooding the porch with harsh white illumination. The figure recoiled immediately, raising an arm across his face. For the first time, Ethan saw him clearly. A man of about 50, thick-set, but moving with an agility that suggested hard labor. He had a blunt jawline with a patchy gray beard and sharp, narrow eyes set deep beneath a fur-lined hood. His coat was a heavy brown parka, stained with mud and old blood. A hunting knife was strapped to his thigh, and around his neck, Ethan's jaw tightened, hung a dog-handling slip lead. The man cursed, turned, and bolted into the tree line. Ethan opened the door and stepped outside, rifle in hand, but stopped after a few feet. The storm was too thick. The man vanished almost instantly into white darkness. He scanned the porch. The attacker had broken part of the lower frame of the door. Fresh boot prints matched the ones from the woods. Something glinted near the steps. Ethan crouched and picked it up. A frayed nylon slip lead, bright red, its metal tag stamped with a number code. A breeder's identification number. Proof. Evidence of an illegal dog breeding operation, one of the kind that chained mothers until they produced litter after litter. Ethan's stomach twisted. That trap, the snare, the boot prints, it was all connected. And now this man was escalating. He returned inside and barred the door. Hope pressed against him, her body rigid with lingering fear. Ethan knelt beside her and stroked her head gently. "We'll protect them," he said softly. Hope lifted her nose and nudged his chin as though she understood, but fear lingered in the air like frost. Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty. Help would not reach him in time. Not with the storm closing the valley. Not with communication down. And the man, desperate, cruel, determined, would return. Ethan reached for the emergency flare gun. His fingers brushed the cold metal. He hesitated only a moment before loading the first flare. He stepped back outside, shielding his face against the slicing wind, and fired upward. The flare shot into the frozen sky, exploding into a brilliant blaze of red that illuminated the storm clouds. The burst faded, but its echo remained, a silent plea stretching across the empty wilderness. He fired the second flare. Another red blossom burned against the night. If anyone was out there, rangers, pilots, bush travelers, they would see it. Inside, Hope lay close to her pups. Ethan sat beside the door, rifle across his lap, eyes locked on the window where the bell still trembled in the wind. He knew he might not live to see morning, but he also knew the man outside would not touch those pups again unless Ethan fell first. The cabin, once a refuge, now stood as a fortress, a battlefield, a line no one would cross without consequence. The storm screamed around them, but inside the cabin, something else filled the air: resolve. The storm rose into a monstrous force by midnight, battering the cabin as if the wind itself wished to tear the wooden walls apart. Snow slammed sideways against the windows, rattling the tin cups tied to the sills. Each gust felt like a blow from an unseen giant. Ethan Moore sat near the front door with his rifle across his lap, exhaustion creeping over him like a heavy blanket he could no longer shake off. His breath fogged the air in faint bursts. The stove could not keep up with the falling temperature. Even indoors, the cold settled into everything. His bones, his thoughts, the faint tremors of PTSD simmering beneath his exhaustion. Hope lay in front of the pups, her body shielding them, her amber eyes never leaving the door. The small, injured pup whimpered occasionally, but was breathing easier. For the first time in hours, Ethan allowed himself a fragile moment of hope. The flares had shot high into the frozen sky. Someone must have seen them. Perhaps a ranger station. Perhaps a nearby homestead. Someone out there might be coming. Then the first blow hit the door. Not the wind, a fist, heavy, intentional. The cabin shuddered. Hope leapt to her feet, barking sharply. The pup squeaked in terror, burrowing beneath her. Ethan stood, gripping the rifle, though he did not raise it yet. Another pounding strike hit the door, louder this time. And then a voice, jagged and warped with fury, screamed through the storm. "Open this door! They're mine!" The man's tone was thick with rage and desperation, a kind that came from possession rather than love. Ethan's stomach tightened. He recognized that voice from the earlier confrontation, a rough, cracking growl belonging to a man in his early 50s whose eyes had burned with a lifetime of bitterness. Ethan had seen many men like him before, men hardened by failure, alcohol, or cruelty, men who carried their misery like a badge and inflicted it on anything weaker than themselves. But this man's darkness went deeper. It was not shaped by war or loss. It was shaped by control, by ownership, by the belief that living creatures existed only to serve him. Another crash rattled the door as the poacher, now fully unmasked by his own fury, slammed a heavy object against the frame. Through the narrow crack where wood had splintered earlier, Ethan saw the man's silhouette illuminated by wind-carried snow. Thick-set and broad-shouldered, he wore the same mud-stained brown parka, but now the hood was down, revealing more of his coarse features, a square, stubbled jaw, a flattened nose from past fights, and scarred cheeks roughened by frostbite. His eyes, small, sharp, and pale, glowed with menace. His mouth twisted into a snarl as he shouted, "You took what belonged to me. That dog is mine. Those pups are mine." Ethan's pulse hammered. "Hope was never yours," he replied, voice steady despite the shaking in his limbs. "You hurt her. You chained her. She escaped." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Truth had its own weight. The man let out a barking laugh. "That mutt owes me money. She was my best breeder. You think a dog just runs away from me?" He punctuated the sentence by slamming something metal against the door. The wood splintered further. "Open the door." The final demand came with a blow so powerful that Ethan staggered backward. Hope barked and lunged toward the door, stopped only because Ethan held out an arm to block her. "Stay back," he whispered. Hope growled low, her entire body vibrating with protective fury. The poacher struck again, hard enough to break part of the frame. A narrow gap opened, letting in a blast of icy wind. The man shoved his gloved hand through, groping wildly for the lock. Ethan lunged forward and slammed the butt of the rifle against the intruding arm. The man roared and pulled back, cursing. Without warning, the poacher threw his full weight against the weakened door. The lock snapped. The dresser barricading the back door was not enough to anchor the front. The door crashed open and slammed into the wall. Snow blasted into the cabin. Ethan staggered backward, rifle raised, but the man lunged first. The collision threw both of them to the ground. The rifle skidded across the wooden floor. Ethan's shoulder hit the stove, sending a ripple of pain down his arm. The poacher pinned him, his breath reeking of alcohol and anger. "You think you can steal from me?" he shouted, spittle hitting Ethan's cheek. "You think you know anything about me? Those animals? They're not objects," Ethan growled, pushing against the man's grip even as his muscles failed him. "They're living beings, and she was terrified of you." That struck a nerve. The man slammed his fist into Ethan's ribs. Pain shot through him. PTSD flared like lightning. For a moment, Ethan was not in Alaska. He was back in a collapsed building in Kandahar, struggling to breathe while debris crushed his chest, hearing the screaming of men he could not save. His breath hitched. His limbs trembled. The poacher saw weakness and grinned. "You're shaking," he taunted. "Broken soldier. You can't even hold a gun." Hope exploded forward. With a sound more primal than anything Ethan had ever heard from her, she launched herself onto the man's back, jaws snapping. The poacher screamed as her teeth sank into the thick fabric of his coat, dragging him off Ethan. He stumbled, swatted at her, and kicked, but Hope refused to release her grip. Ethan pushed himself to his knees, gasping, vision blurry. The man shoved Hope hard, slamming her into the wall. She yelped but regained her stance instantly. Her eyes burned with a fierce, maternal fury, this time not for herself, but for the tiny lives behind her. The poacher picked up Ethan's rifle from the ground. He sneered. "I should have put down that mutt years ago." Ethan's heart lurched. He surged forward, tackling the poacher from the side before the man could aim. The rifle clattered across the floor again, sliding under the table. Ethan and the poacher fought hand to hand, slipping on melting snow and broken ice. The man was strong, fueled by rage. Ethan was exhausted, his body shaking from cold and trauma. But he had something more powerful than strength, a reason. The pups, Hope, the fragile, desperate trust the animals had placed in him. With a guttural cry, Ethan twisted, using the man's momentum against him. They crashed against the table, which toppled, scattering tools and lanterns. The poacher reached for his knife, but Ethan grasped his wrist and slammed it against the ground. The blade skittered away. Hope lunged again, biting at the man's coat, pulling him off balance. Together, man and dog, they overpowered the attacker. Ethan pinned the poacher's arm behind his back and pressed his forearm across the man's shoulders. The poacher struggled a moment longer, then finally went limp, panting heavily. Ethan's muscles shook violently. His breath came in ragged bursts, fogging in the freezing air pouring from the shattered doorway. He pushed himself up and immediately collapsed to his knees. His vision blurred. The cold hit him all at once like a hammer. He swayed, barely conscious. The temperature inside the cabin was dropping fast. Snow blew across the floor. Ethan's fingers went numb. His breath grew shallow. He felt himself tipping sideways, then falling. Hope ran to him instantly, standing above him as if shielding him with her body. She gnashed her teeth at the unconscious poacher, positioning herself between Ethan and any threat. Her ears flattened as she listened to the storm, ready to defend him with her life. Then, through the roaring blizzard, came a light, a bright, stabbing beam cutting through snow. Then another. Headlights, snowmobiles. Voices shouted. Boots crunched rapidly toward the cabin. The flare had worked. Someone had come. Hope stood her ground until the figures appeared in the doorway, bundled Alaskan villagers and a young park ranger carrying a medkit, their faces grim but determined. Only then did she step aside, allowing them to reach the injured man she guarded. The storm began to ease as the villagers and the young park ranger moved swiftly into the shattered cabin. Snow still blew through the broken door, scattering across the wooden floor, but the shrieking wind no longer drowned out human voices. Lanterns flickered, casting warm ripples of light over Ethan Moore's collapsed form. Hope hovered above him, her body tense, her growls fading only when she realized the newcomers were not a threat. The pups whimpered softly from the overturned blanket, their tiny bodies trembling with cold and fear. The young ranger, warrior, Liam Carter, a man in his late 20s with a lean build, sandy blonde hair dusted with frost, and clear blue eyes sharpened by concern, knelt beside Ethan. Liam's face bore a quiet seriousness uncommon for his age, shaped by years of patrolling remote Alaskan wilderness where one wrong step could mean tragedy. He gently pressed 2 fingers against Ethan's neck. A breath of relief left him. He's alive. Weak pulse, severe cold exposure, but alive. Liam's voice was steady, calm, training overriding fear. His gloved hand brushed snow from Ethan's cheek. We need to move him now. 2 villagers helped lift Ethan onto a rescue sled, strong men bundled in heavy wolf-gray parkas, their faces hidden behind fur-lined hoods. One of them, an older Inupiat man named Nakaluk, with deep-set dark eyes and a weathered face shaped by 7 decades of Arctic winters, adjusted the blankets over Ethan's body and murmured a quiet prayer in his native tongue. Nakaluk was known throughout Prospect Creek as a man of deep intuition and quiet dignity. When the world went silent in deepest winter, it was often he who understood what the land was trying to say. Hope refused to leave Ethan's side. When they tried to guide her away to secure her for transport, she growled, not aggressively, but with a trembling warning born of fear. Liam crouched beside her, extending a gloved hand. "Easy, girl," he said softly. "He's safe now. We're helping him." Hope looked at Ethan, then at Liam, her ears flicking with uncertainty. Liam lowered his voice further. "You protected him. Now let us protect both of you." Slowly, very slowly, Hope pressed her no into Liam's palm. It was permission. The pups were gently wrapped in thick cloth and tucked into a thermal crate carried by a young woman from the village. Nora Hale, a petite brunette in her 30s with warm brown eyes and a soft, round face flushed pink from the cold. She was a schoolteacher during the short Alaskan fall and an informal wildlife caregiver during the brutal winters. Nora's temperament was gentle, her voice quiet but steady as she murmured, "You're safe now, little ones. Your mama's right outside." Outside, the wind carried the last remnants of the storm across the darkened valley. Snowmobiles revved to life, their headlights sweeping through the forest like thin golden blades. Ethan, wrapped tightly, was secured to the sled behind Liam's snowmobile. Hope trotted beside him until they coaxed her onto Nora's vehicle, where she lay curled with her pups, refusing to look away from the man who had fought for them. The ride to the medical station was long and harsh. At times, the cold sliced so sharply against exposed skin that it felt like the air itself was sharpening into knives. But the storm was fading, the sky opening just enough to reveal a faint, trembling shimmer of stars above the black wilderness. By the time they reached the outpost, a converted ranger cabin with wide wooden steps and a tall radio tower, the wind had settled into a weary whisper. Inside, warmth flooded the room, carrying the earthy smell of pine wood and coffee. Dr. Elise Morgan, the outpost medic, hurried forward. She was a tall, slender woman in her mid-40s with short steel-gray hair tucked behind one ear, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that reflected decades of emergency work. Steady, insightful, touched with compassion, but honed by realism. She placed her hands on Ethan's face, examining frostbite, pulse, breathing. Severe hypothermia, borderline stage 2. Get blankets, warm IV fluids. We'll stabilize him here. Hope paced at the foot of the cot, whining, her tail tucked. The pups slept in a bundled knot, rising and falling with each tiny breath. Hours passed. Ethan remained unconscious, his skin mottled and pale, but slowly, very slowly, color returned to his cheeks. By dawn, he stirred. The first breath he took was shallow. The second, deeper. His eyelids fluttered open. He blinked at the wooden rafters above him, at the lantern glow, at the faint hum of a heater. His gaze finally lowered, falling on 3 small pups curled against his chest, their bodies trembling with soft dreams. Hope lay beside the cot, her chin resting gently on his arm. Ethan's dry lips curved into something fragile but unmistakable, a smile. "You made it," Liam said quietly from the corner, where he had been monitoring Ethan through the night. "You scared the hell out of all of us." Ethan swallowed, voice hoarse. "The dogs?" "Safe," Nora said warmly. "All of them." Dr. Morgan explained what had happened. The poacher was in custody, transported to a larger holding facility downriver when the weather permitted. The police confirmed he was tied to a long-standing illegal breeding ring operating at the edge of the Dalton Highway. There would be charges, many of them. Ethan listened silently, one hand drifting to Hope's fur. She lifted her head and nudged his palm as though reminding him she was there because of him, not because of fate or chance, but because he chose to open his door. When he was fully conscious, Liam approached him with a clipboard. "Once you're discharged, you'll need to decide what happens next with the dogs." His tone softened. "But, judging by the way she's glued herself to your side, I think she's already decided for you." Hope stared at Ethan with a gaze that held no fear anymore, only trust, deep and unshakable. Ethan placed a tired hand on her head, fingers threading into her fur. "I'll take them," he whispered. "All 4, if they'll have me." Hope nuzzled closer, sealing the promise. A week later, after Ethan regained his strength and the pup's injuries healed, the group traveled back to his cabin. The building looked battered, door cracked, snow piled inside, but still standing. Ethan began repairs immediately. He replaced the door, reinforced the windows, and built a small enclosed shelter beside the cabin. Something warm, sturdy, safe. Not just for Hope and her pups, for any abandoned or suffering creature that might one day need a refuge. What once was a lonely cabin became something else entirely, a sanctuary. And one morning, as the first glimmer of the Alaskan sun stretched across the horizon, turning the endless white landscape into a field of gold, Ethan stepped outside with Hope by his side. Her pups tumbled clumsily around his boots. He rested a hand on her head and spoke softly, his breath forming a small cloud in the frozen air. "Because you knocked on my window," he whispered, "I found a reason to start over." Hope leaned into him. A soldier found healing, a mother found safety. And in a land cold enough to freeze breath, something warm refused to die. Simple, stubborn kindness. Before you go, let me ask you something from the heart. Have you ever witnessed a moment that felt like a small miracle, something that reminded you God is still watching over us? Share it in the comments. Your story might be the light someone else needs today. And tell me this too, where in the world are you watching from? I love seeing our family grow across countries and time zones. If this story warmed your heart, even just a little, please tap like, hit subscribe, and share the video with someone who could use a reminder that kindness still saves lives. May God bless you and keep you safe. I'm reading every comment. Talk to me down below.